All right. So this is another live stream that I'm doing here today, and we are going to. This is really off the cuff. I actually messaged Colin about I don't know, maybe what 15 minutes ago.
That sounds right. Sounds
Yeah.
right.
And said, hey, we had a call scheduled, and then we just decided to do it live. So we are jumping on, going live, and talking about self doubt. And we are going to be on YouTube and Instagram. So I hope that everybody enjoys what we're going to chat about. And if you have any comments, make sure you jump into the comments and ask questions and stuff like that. Um, the topic of self doubt. I think it's something that a lot of us face regularly. And I think it's something that maybe we don't talk about enough as far as some practical strategies to work through it. What do you think about that, Colin? As far as self doubt, what comes up for you around that idea of self doubt?
Yeah, I'm self-doubting myself right now. And so
Exactly.
yeah, no, I think, as part of my own coaching practice and the people that I've mentored and advised over time, um, self-doubt is one of those ingredients or one of those obstacles and barriers that people it's ultimately what holds them back.
Yeah.
And it holds me back on a regular basis, right? And so I think it's a very natural thing and a very common part of the human experience, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting because as you mentioned about the your self doubt right now, right? It's especially really comes up for me when it's something that I know is going to take me closer to my goals,
Mm.
but it's something that I'm not comfortable with or I've never done before, and it can carry a lot of weight, you
Yep.
know, and it takes a huge amount of effort to overcome that. And I think that's kind of why I threw this out so quickly, because I was like, okay, this is something I want to do, something I'm afraid to do, and something I can easily procrastinate on unless I just jump in. So here
Yeah.
we are. And uh, so I do have a little bit of a outline that we would cover to kind of cover some topics.
Yeah.
Let's kind of go into that. So um, we kind of just touched on what is self doubt and why people struggle with it. Why don't you share a story, maybe something recently or in the past that stands out around the idea of self doubt, and maybe what that experience taught you, and how you were able to recognize it in the moment, or were you able to recognize it in the moment and work through it, or was it afterwards? So
Yeah.
let's start there.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of an origin story for me, because over the last year I've started to make plans as I move into kind of a career transition, if you will.
Hmm.
Ultimately establishing my own coaching business, my own coaching persona. So, setting up a little website and setting myself up rebranding myself as a leadership and performance coach, as I go through the process. And so for me, it really started with a couple of opportunities um, earlier last year with my current employer, where it was being given and presented really unique and different um, experiences or opportunities for kind of roles in the next couple of years. And what was really interesting is for me, I've been on a little bit of a journey of my own self discovery, trying to learn more about myself. Um, in a more deeper way, and as a man, as a partner, as a father, as a community member, and so I almost immediately saw the self doubt creep in when I was presented this opportunity. And what's really interesting for me is it manifests itself in, well, should I do this? Can I do this? What's the right thing to do? And the way I process things, I start to do a lot of storytelling, at which point I also know enough now that when I'm doing a lot of storytelling, I have to step back
Is that
and
stories telling to yourself? Sorry, just
yeah,
to clear. Yeah.
to absolutely
So
ruminating
that,
really in my
yeah,
head, right?
yeah, okay.
Um, talking to myself and quickly I have to stop and start to say, well, what's really causing this, right? And so for me, I was able to recognize that a lot of it was rooted in a number of different things, within me,
Right.
and everything from what are my values, what do I want to do, how I want to approach life, all these kinds of things, and once I started to recognize that I was really burying the opportunity in my self doubt, I was able to you know step back, really reflect, really think through, and assess the opportunity for myself in
Mm,
a more objective way, right?
mm,
And so, like, to me, the biggest thing around self doubt is if you're not able to do it yourself, um, you know, how do you get to that place where you recognize that self doubt? So sometimes some of us are able to, and I'm not saying I can do it all the time, or learning as I've learned to share some of those more uncomfortable scenarios with friends and colleagues and others, and coaches and mentors, who can kind of help me snap out of it a little bit,
mm.
right? And so having the ability to either have someone that you trust point out that self-doubt, or recognizing it within yourself is actually pretty important,
Yeah,
because that's how you kind of get through it.
yeah, yeah. I hear some themes there, right? It's awareness,
Mm,
not always from yourself,
no,
in the sense that you can't see it. Um, like you said, the storytelling and the narrative inside, we can always talk ourselves out of all kinds of things, and
yeah,
and then the other theme in there is having those trusted advisors or people that you can turn to be like, hey, no, yeah, actually you got this, like you can move through this, and um I think that's really important, especially when you're new to sort of tackling self-doubt, and you're new to moving outside your comfort zone. I think that advisor or those friends or colleagues or coaches become a real good tool, because they just help you recognize that, and then as you become more aware of it, you can now manage it more often than not, right?
yeah,
Personally, you get into that story and you're like, oh, wait a second, that's me talking myself out of this. No, I,
mhm.
I really want to make it happen.
Yeah, and
um
just on that note, like it's for me, and I think for many others, that storytelling that we do internally is
mhm.
is powerful.
Yeah,
And it's good, it's good sometimes, right? But it can hold you back, and sometimes even admitting that is powerful.
yeah, that's a good point, because stories are so powerful in all kinds of ways. They
True,
can help us achieve great things, and then also hold us back from achieving great things.
absolutely.
And it's the reflection back on that story and be like, okay, is that the movie I want to, or the chapter I want to write, or is it a new chapter I want to write? And one of the things that I did this year, and I shared with you, or I think, I can't remember how it came up in the group, but this that story of 2024, right? That
Mhm.
chapter exercise, and it's a little off topic, but it's a great way to sort of do that annual audit and look back, and also help start to recognize where the self doubt maybe crept in, held you back from some of the things that you wanted to accomplish, and then it kind of gives you that energy to tackle those things, bring them forward, and be like, okay, this is something I do want to work through, and now I recognize what was holding me back, and now I can take action towards it. So
Yeah,
um
and I don't actually think it's off topic, right? Because for me, I so I'm, as I go and go through, building my coaching practice,
mhm,
one of the things, I'm offered different opportunities to run different exercises, and using the example that you and I shared
yeah,
around, your 2024 story. Um, it was interesting because it was like, well, do I really want to say that? Is that how I want to say it? Which to me
yeah,
are all forms of are all expressions of self-doubt, because and so it can show up in the smallest moments.
yeah,
And it's recognizing it, and having an objective conversation with you or with somebody else, within yourself or with somebody else, to recognize it. But it happens a lot. It really does.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. And actually, that's a good segue because I kind of wanted to touch on, you know, what are the root causes of that? So, like you said, it happens a lot. Where do you think, um, like, I can think of a lot of things coming up for me just as I reflect as here we are in our first live stream, right? Like, where do you think it comes from? What is the when do we develop that, and how come it I think it becomes for until we become aware of it, we actually practice that skill pretty well,
Yeah.
and it holds us back from a lot of things, and that's
Yeah.
usually when we decide to move through it, it's because we've taken an evaluation of where we are in our life and an audit, so to speak, and then we've decided not to let it control us anymore. We've
No.
decided to rewrite those stories. So to that question, what do you think the root cause is? Or let's start with a few, anyways. Where do you think they come from?
Yeah, like I have to believe, and I'm not afraid of sharing my own experience, right? Is it's kind of corny. You go to therapy and you get talking about your past, and Connor Beaton's men's work, his book, has
Hmm.
a whole, specifically from, well, I think it applies to anybody, but it's targeted at men,
Hmm.
because most men don't do that work, and I certainly hadn't done that work at that time. But you start to realize how events in your mind have stuck with you in different ways, right? And
Hmm.
so, I had a pretty average, middle class, good family upbringing, but school was never my strong suit. Sports was definitely not my strong suits. Um, and I remember, experiences and saying, well, like, yeah, I was, because my parents were not athletes or athletic, so they
Hmm.
kind of um, dismissed or pushed down the concept of participating in sports. And for actually, it turns out a couple of different reasons, but what I felt was like, I can't do that,
Mm.
or I'm not able to. And then, or something very simple is, I was surrounded by boys that played hockey and I didn't. And
Hmm.
so we go to the pond and I'm not good enough skater, because guess what? I don't skate 3 hours a week, kind of thing, right? And so,
Right.
so I think where that comes from is some of those long-term experiences that connect to, and as they build up, and as they kind of pile up, I should say,
Hmm.
you get to a place where you start to ask yourself, well, I've not been able to do this. How can I do this, right? And so, um, and reflecting on those situations and going back and understanding them, you realize, well, it wasn't really about that. It was just, I just didn't have the opportunity. But that's how I, at the time, reacted and took it in, and you know that feeds my self-doubt today, right? And
Hmm.
so that's one place for me, for sure.
Yeah. So you're saying like that upbringing, early memories stuff
Hmm.
that ties into so many things that
Yep.
that we deal with, the past experiences, and I can relate a lot to that as well. For myself personally, I grew up in a single parent home. Actually, my grandfather, and always felt different, right?
Mm,
And doubted my place in the world, and it definitely carried through. Um, the interesting thing is, though, we have in some ways it drives us too, right?
mhm,
It becomes a tool to push us, not accepting that self doubt, right? Like you
right,
have that narrative, uh, but then there's that other side of you, that deeper essence of who you are, that says, you know what, I'm not going to accept that. And what I noticed in my experience is, yeah, those past experiences definitely made me feel that way. It pushed me to do things that a lot of people said I couldn't do.
right.
Um, where it haunted me, and still I
Mm,
work through it every day now, is the acceptance of the success that
mm,
I move forward on, the acceptance of the things that I've accomplished, the taking pause and showing gratitude in those moments, because there's still that little piece of you that says, you don't deserve that, right?
totally.
And I think when it comes from a past experience, it's one of those things that it's probably always going to be there. you know,
Hmm.
I don't know. I keep working on it, so I'm hoping maybe one day it's not there, but it happens a lot less frequently for sure. And when it does happen, it doesn't stick around, right? Because I'm able to
That's
be
right.
like, whatever. That's a
Hmm.
past narrative, right? So,
Yep.
um, I did want to talk too. I think right now with our social community, even like us as a live stream and things like that, there's a ton of external factors too that I I think are becoming more prevalent. Social comparison, societal pressures, criticism, right? Even
Hmm.
though criticism is good most of the time. What do you think about that? Where does that come in for you or land for you, especially as you're transitioning from a corporate career to your coaching career? um, those dynamics probably play a lot more, right? Because from a corporation perspective, they're looking for productivity and all that kind of stuff, and some people just might not be able to take that, especially if they're moving through their career with hopes of being better and stuff like that. What's your take
Yeah.
on that, on those
Yeah.
external
So
factors?
yeah, the external factors are surprisingly huge. So as I learn, so I've been privileged. I've had a great employer for a long time, you know, decades. And so I'm one of those rarities in the market, if you will. But I've been pretty blessed that way. But here's where it manifests itself, right? Like I'm now free to start building, my next career as a coach. Um, like I start to do what I normally do, which is bury myself in understanding the market and what does it mean to be a coach and how do you get clients and all
Mm.
this kind of stuff. And then you get exposed to the Instagrams and the LinkedIns and the influencers and all those things, and you kind of go like, wow, like, I just want to have a little coaching business that sustains me for the next 10 years. And I'm being bombarded by um these ideals externally, and I'm like, wow, like, you know can I do this? Like, will I
Mhm,
be able to make a living at it? Because it
mhm.
seems like if you're not making 10 grand a month, like, and what like 10, 20, $30,000 a month, like, you're a failure, right?
Yeah,
Or that's not sustainable or whatever, right? And
yeah,
um so the external and I use that as a very specific example, right? but
yeah.
but I agree, like the thing that we face as adults, but I also think of our children who are exposed to a different world of technology and exposure, and I think it's societal across the board. One of the things that I really think about is, hey, we're constantly being bombarded with what's good, right? Like growing up for me, or as I was becoming an adult, there's this concept of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like what's
Mm,
the neighbor doing? What are and do you have a good enough car and all, and that weighs on it. Like it's incredible how much it weighed on me, as I became an older adult. It's
mhm,
amazing to see how I see it and how
mm,
it weighs on others. Um, and that's a really hard reality for a lot of people, is that just that you're constantly pressured to do whatever your moment, like your mom wanted you to be a doctor, right?
mm.
Like, okay, well,
Yeah,
I didn't do that, right? And
yeah,
it's like, or whatever the story is, right? Or, you were just not good enough at sports, or you're supposed to be this, or you're supposed to be that. Like, I deal, a lot of my clients are women, and and so the stories around, like, women have to do it all because we've painted this picture that they have to be a mom, a partner, a kick-ass executive, like all of that kind of stuff. And hitting all three of those things at the same time is extremely challenging. And
mhm,
but they're constantly like women in particular and I'm using that one because I think it's pretty poignant. Like
mhm.
that's a group of a slice of our society that is bombarded with expectations.
Yeah,
And one of the number one topics I have that I talk about and work through with and explore with my female clients is like, so how do I do all of this, right? And
right.
because what they're trying to do is compare themselves to whatever standard others have been exposing them to, right? So that feeds that self doubt. Um, just had a client yesterday talking about their own, wanting to do something specific, only to realize they've already done this before, but
Right.
in the context of all of the new things, because her life has changed, um, all of the new things that are in her life, she knows exactly what to do, but in the context of all the new things, it's, you know, people are saying, well, she's made to feel like she can't.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's very frustrating, right? Like that
yeah,
becomes very frustrating. So that's a very, I think the societal pressures on all of us in our own way are uh, pretty intense, I think, or are very much a major factor in how we manage our own self doubt.
yeah. I can totally see that, and I it's interesting as you were talking about that, right? Because there's this idea of self doubt, that says we can't accomplish those things, but then there's also this pressure to accomplish kind of things that probably nobody can.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like we're creating self-doubt around something that really is unattainable, right? And nobody, like, we're not taking time and reflecting, like, oh, like, yeah, there's 24 hours in the day, there's no way I'm going to do all those things, right?
Right.
Like,
That's exactly right.
um or we're going to try it, and like most of us do, we do try, we jump in, and then 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months later, we're like completely destroyed because we've just burnt ourselves out. And
That's right.
so I think, to me, one of the things that comes up for me in that, when I mentioned how the idea of self-doubt is a bit of a tool to push us, it's also the other side of that coin is it's a bit of a tool to check in and say, hey, like, is this maybe just a bit of a warning sign that I might be trying to take on too much?
Hmm.
But again, that's all tied to that awareness piece. Like, what is the story I'm telling myself? Is it conscious? Is it logic? Am I connecting to my essence? Does it feel right? Or is it just avoiding something, avoiding discomfort, all those types of things. So I think there's a bunch of skills wrapped up in there that we need to learn. And then we can really leverage self-doubt as a powerful tool for both directions, right? Propelling us forward or holding us back from taking too much on.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that sort of
Yeah, like,
perspective?
well, it's like I work in a high performance organization with high performing individuals, and I'm surrounded by them, right? And it's like I love that example because many of the high performers that I know that I've worked with are driven by, you could say, fear,
Hmm.
but it's really self-doubt, right? It's like
Yeah.
that fear of failure, right? And
Yeah.
so and so that pushes them, or they use that as fuel to do all kinds of terrific and impressive things. And then you find out through research that a high number of them, we call it midlife crisis, or we
Hmm.
call it career transition, or we
Yeah.
call it a whole pile of different things,
Yeah.
is a subset, and there'll always be those that are able to do it all. But that's a very, and I say do it all. Um, they get help and they figure it out, and they seem to. But that's a very rarefied space, right?
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
vast majority of people use that self doubt, especially early in their careers, like call it the first 10 or 15 years of really pushing and propelling and moving them until they get to a place of burnout, or resentment, or their relationship with a partner fails, or they have a medical issue, or whatever, that kind of knocks them back
Mm.
into line. Because I think we often talk about self-doubt as a often it's portrayed as a bad thing. It can be a good thing because it can propel you to move to a different place. It's when it's
Hmm.
overdone. Um, it's almost like an overdone strength. Like when it's
Yeah.
overdone, it starts to penalize you, right?
Yeah.
And so that, to me, is, and that's, some are wise enough, or I've had, I was talking to one client yesterday. They have are working through some challenges, and um, but they had some very significant events early in life, like call
Mm.
it in their late teens, early 20s, right?
Hmm.
That really uh, evoked awareness for them of all of these things, right? So they're
Hmm.
very in tune. Me,
Hmm.
on the other hand, it wasn't until I was like 42, 43, 44 that I kind of started to realize, oh wow, okay. like like
Yeah.
there's more to life. There's different things that we need to think about. And my motivation just full on stopped, right? But that's, I think that's right. Like there's an opportunity, once you're aware, to let the self-doubt propel you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And like, just as we were started the conversation talking about, what's holding you back is your self-doubt. Also recognizing that I'm doing this because I'm feeling compelled or pressured because of my own self-doubt. You also need to rein that in, if it starts to be overdone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it that ties into awareness, right? It ties
Yeah,
into all
yeah,
that, taking the time to just check in with yourself, as much as possible to recognize where it's coming from, and then you can make decisions
that's right.
that will move you forward. Uh, and that kind of is a good segue because we'll jump into some strategies because, as you know, when you and I chat, I always like to kind of talk about tactical things that we can do to help, right? So if
Mhm.
you're at the beginning of that process of learning about your self-doubt and awareness, and have recognized that it's shown up and maybe held you back from things that you wanted to accomplish, there's some pretty easy strategies to do, and I laid out three. So I'm gonna say the three, and then just get your input on them and see what you think, and maybe even share on if any of these resonate with you specifically on how you've implemented that strategy to overcome self-doubt.
Mm.
Maybe especially recently with this, like you said, you're transitioning now. You're kind of in the middle of two things right now, which for a lot of people that could be overwhelming, right? And then
Yep.
that's where the self-doubt comes in all the time, right? Like, oh, this is too
Totally.
much, right? So,
Yeah. Yep.
um, so I've got three that I personally use with my clients. I personally use personally, like for myself as well, when I'm in those situations. It's reframing negative thoughts. So I think it's super important, right? What is that internal story? I did an earlier podcast on this, right? On rewriting your narrative, right?
Mm.
And that takes practice, right?
Yep.
Because you'll rewrite that story, and then that old story will just come over and just rewrite it right back to where it was, and you're like, what the fuck? I thought I just went through this.
Totally. Yep.
So it's reframing those negative thoughts. A big thing that I believe in strongly is celebrating the small wins, right?
Mm.
I do a 3-2-1 check in, 3 wins every day. And I think Dan Sullivan, that's sort of his idea out of the book Gap in the Gain. Just that moment of gratitude. What did you win today? What did you win at? And it doesn't matter how small they are. Man, the confidence and the power you gain from that when you just take some time to reflect on those wins. And then seeking support from mentors, friends, and coaches. That's the third thing.
Mm.
I personally have a coach that I go to, and as you know, I coach as well. So that's my business. I think it's one of those things that we always used to look at that those people had. And
Mm.
when you mentioned like some people can do what we think is amazing things, but when you actually peel back, well, yeah, they have all those support structures there, right?
Mm.
They do have a coach, they do have a personal trainer, they do have a like they're outsourcing some of the things that they know that they can't do. And I think that's really important. Where self-doubt kind of roots itself is, well, if we don't do it all ourselves, are we really accomplishing it? But
Right.
when you look at really the people that are getting stuff done, they're like, okay, I need to focus on the things that I am good at. So what can I outsource to make sure that I am doing all the things that I want to do?
Yeah.
So that's my take on those techniques. So what do you think about that on those practical strategies?
Yeah, and I'll start on your first one there, really, right? Like managing the negative story, or reframing the story as you say it. To,
Yeah.
to to me, to me, the questions I ask myself is like, what are the facts? What are the
Okay.
facts, and what are the assumptions I'm making, right? And so, I like to meditate. I like breathing exercises. I've learned, over the last 10 years, I've built my own physical practice of yoga and
Hmm.
self-awareness or
Hmm.
mindfulness. Um, but those are the questions I ask, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, what's a fact here? Is this a fact, or is it an assumption? And I find that I assume a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
it's like I assume a lot, and we all know what happens when you make an ass of you and
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, so that helps me reframe, right? Because it's like, okay, what am I really assumption? What are the and to me the assumption one is probably the bigger one, that helps me kind of reorient the conversation and stabilize it. Because I like what you said, right? Like the negative side can kind of is very heavy and
Yeah.
can and is rooted in what you think you believe. And for me, the way that I've uprooted or taken that foundation, or taken the negativity off its foundation, is by, like, what am I assuming here, right? And if
Hmm.
I'm and that I find helps ground me fairly quickly back into the truth and what is really happening, which then takes, the self down doubt down, for myself.
Yeah.
um the small wins, and I agree with that too, in the sense of, um this morning I was in a session and I took a risk, tried
Yeah.
something, right?
Okay.
And the person immediately turned around and said, "No, man, like, um, you could do better." I'm like, "Okay, all right, well, I tried it. I was something I had not tried before." And to me, often I take the reaction as a bit of it is something to celebrate, right? It was kind of like, okay, well, the reaction was like the reaction was not positive, but
Okay.
it wasn't deathly. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't the end of the relationship. It wasn't the end of the conversation. It was like, nah, you could do better. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
great. And so so taking the time to celebrate, we are, you know, back to the social pressures comment that you made, right, or
Hmm.
comparison that you made. Everyone seems to, it's like when I get the house and when I get the car, when I get six figures and like, and like we all have to we all have to recognize and take the time to recognize the progress that we've made, right? Like
Hmm.
it's not, and that for me has been a big learning around, you know, whether it's my physical fitness or, you know, whatever I'm doing, to take the time to think about, okay, well, where have I come from?
Yeah.
You know, even last week versus this week, right? Or, you know, depending on the topic, even on a daily basis, right? So I think the whole concept of gratitude, and sometimes that gratitude piece is one, acknowledging it. I like what you do in terms of, you know, writing it down in a journal, but I think it's like, you know, for me, sometimes I just like to, yeah, well done, Colin. Like that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
And people look at me and go, "What's he talking about?" And it's like, well, but that for me is like, okay, cool. And if somebody does ask me, then it's a moment to share, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's great, right? Um, and then yeah, um, surrounding yourself by with people you can trust.
Mm.
And you know, one of the pieces of advice that I've been uh, advising people on more and more recently is get out of your circle.
Hmm.
And so, you know, get out and find different people that can give you different perspective.
Hmm.
That that
So powerful.
it
Yeah.
yeah, that just can, you know, like this example I used about this lady yesterday, it's like, man, like go find somebody else who's gonna, because internally here corporately you might not get what you're looking for, but I guarantee you you're going to get a different perspective from the outside world, um, which aligns with what her goals and objectives are, right? And so
Hmm.
so having a confidant or multiple people and somebody that you can, that actually will be willing to have the conversation. Not, I mean, I know it's not, I don't want to set the standard too high, but you kind of want to have somebody that can objectively be there with you,
Yeah.
right? Not truly listen and
Yeah.
truly, you know, care for you and your success, and you know, be there with you for your trials and tribulations. And you know, whether that's a coach, that's a mentor, that could be a very good friend. Um, I think the number one battle, certainly with men, is talking about some of this stuff. I think
Yeah.
women generally, women and non-binary individuals tend to do a little bit better at it, at sharing what's going on for them. But it and you know, you need somebody that you can trust to be able to open up, and the trust is really about safety, so that you're not going to get bombarded by an advice monster, maybe because maybe
Yeah.
that's not what you need, right? So
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah, so those are three great approaches that, and certainly how I manage myself on the daily.
Yeah. And do you have any other strategy like those are my three? Do you have any other strategies that you'd like to share that might tie into that a little bit, or are they all a similar theme?
Yeah, they're kind of similar theme, but you know, going back to the negative piece is, I use running and biking
Mm.
as moments of being able to give me time to think, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you would say, okay, well, like for me, the physical activity is a bit of a trigger,
Yeah.
right? It gets me out of whatever funk or situation I'm in. But it is a bit of meditation for me. And
Mm.
if it's not during the ride, it's like it clears my head, it gives me space. so that when I do come back to the situation, the scenario, I have maybe a clearer head.
Hmm.
So finding whatever trigger for you allows you to triggers maybe not the right word, but helps you something that helps you snap out of it or distance yourself from the rumination, from the negative self-talk, to clear your head so that then you can kind of approach it with all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point too. As you know, like a big part of my coaching is I include, just because of my background, a large function percentage of my coach, well, not a large percentage, but a big piece of it is that physical output, whatever that
Hmm.
may be. 10
Yep.
minutes of exercise every day, or big massive workouts because you're, training for a triathlon, whatever it may
Right.
be. It's a big part. And I think, uh, maybe not talked enough about, in the sense that, yeah, that spending time with yourself, getting physical, it builds so much confidence in so many different things,
Hmm.
that when you come back to that narrative, now you can actually be like, no, that's not my story, this is my story. and
That's right.
and here's the evidence, like you had mentioned before, measuring yourself backwards, and looking down the path that you've just came up, instead of always trying to look at the path, the horizon line above you. Let's see what else I got in here. We kind of covered. Okay, so I think we kind of hit most things. Let's kind of go through. Is there anything, um, you want to share? How people can reach out to you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
this is it.
I'm so thank you for the opportunity to chat today. I think this is a very cool topic, one that certainly you don't often see two guys talking about, fairly openly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm on my name's Colin Cochran. I'm working towards an ICF certified coach, really focusing on leadership and performance. So think of career development, those kinds of things. I'm available on LinkedIn, colincochran.ca as my website. And yeah, always open to help those that are looking to make progress in their lives. This topic I think is important.
Mm.
And topics like these are important because um, I think the more we talk about it, the more we can kind of honor ourselves, and then also we can then show up for others, which is as a society, I think being able to show up for others is probably one of the most important things we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that you sharing that, because it made me think of a few things, um, that I want to share, as we wrap up. One, you talked about getting outside of your sphere,
Mhm.
and that's how you and I met, right?
Yep.
Is uh, and man, the power of that has been amazing, right?
Hmm.
Because sometimes it is important. Like, we have close friends, but they have their narratives on who you are, right?
Yep.
and when we are in a place of growth, which, like, that's one of my values, is I strive to grow every day and learn something and be a better version of myself. So sometimes those not that I don't value those friendships, but they can also be stuck in that place of, holding you in that narrative that they know you of, right? And
That's right.
so that outside perspective reminds you, like, oh yeah, like, okay, this is okay. And then you can lead in those actual long-term relationships, because now you're like, well, yeah, okay, that's who I was, but now you need to rethink of the narrative, and it challenges them. And I see amazing growth in my, long-term friends because of that. So I cherish the friendship that we're building between you and I, and that was really that stepping out of
Yep.
that inner circle.
Right on.
um
Thank you.
and the other thing I wanted to touch on, is this idea of, men not talking about this. um One of the things that I learned from my coach and mentor, Bob Proctor, was service.
Mm.
And as my coaching practice has evolved over the last 3 years, I realize now, like, men are just like innately in us. We are meant to serve, right?
Hmm.
And I think the struggle that we're facing is we just don't know where to direct that all the time. And I think that opportunity to talk and share and make it open that men can find their truth and then serve and become better versions of themselves by just opening up those conversations. They don't have to be crazy conversations either. They just have to be vulnerable and authentic and open, right? We
That's
have
right.
to let go of that societal or cultural pressures of who they think, and let go of the self-doubt and show up as who we want to be and see who we figure. And sometimes it's not always going to be perfect, like you were mentioning that win, in the sense that, yeah, it didn't go how I wanted, but man, I showed up who I wanted to be, and
Right.
that's a win, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And then you're going to learn something from that, and that's really
That's
where the
exactly right.
growth is. The learning is in those challenging moments, not in the successes, right? Like,
That's right.
when we sit and celebrate, we're not being like, yeah, I learned all these lessons. No, we're just celebrating,
Mhm.
right?
That's right. Exactly.
When we're in the lessons learning it, we're like, oh yeah, okay, this is hard work.
Yeah.
So I
No.
do appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me. So I will definitely include the links to your LinkedIn and your website and things like that
Please. Thank you.
in the video description. Once this is stopped live, the great thing about YouTube is it becomes a video there. So I will share that link with you as well, so you can share it around
Amazing.
your community. And yeah, I look forward to doing this again. It was fun.
Thank you.
So I will probably just call you. Maybe next time we'll plan one. And
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about a very important topic.
yeah,
Thank you.
all right, brother. So
All
I'm
right.
going to hit the end here, and we'll talk to everybody later.